Here I have an Athearn Rio Grande Hustler, and this one does not run. So today we're going to try and fix that. To start, I need to test this little thing out. I'll give it some power. I know for a fact it's not going to run, but we'll see if the motor itself starts. And that's full power. I'll give this thing a little bit of a wiggle. And I don't know if you can hear that. The motor is very clearly revved up and it's not going anywhere. Something that I conveniently didn't mention is that this is specifically a band drive model, which some of you probably figured out, and that's why this thing doesn't run. If you take a look at the bottom, you should be able to see some rubber bands here, and there are none. So we need to replace those, and as you saw, the motor ran, which is a good sign, but this thing needs a good cleanup anyway. So to start, I'm just going to get the shell off this thing, which is just as simple as that, and we can get to work on the drivetrain. Before we get to work, I did just want to mention that I did actually get another band drive engine along with this one that I need to work on in the future. This came in a pretty big eBay lot, so expect to see another one of these in the future. So, the shell is now out of the way. I gave that a quick little wash and got all the dust off of it, but before we get to work on this thing, I wanted to give a brief overview of the chassis of one of these band drive Hustlers, and they're really, really simple. One thing to note, like a lot of Athearn engines, there's no wiring of any sort in here. There's just this one metal bar. The bottom of the motor picks up power from one side of the model, and then there is one of these little bars, I believe it's this side, that when we unscrew that, it falls off, and this picks up the other side of power, and that's how this thing gets power. Something else to note is there's no headlight in here, which is kind of strange, and other than that, you just have these little plastic pieces here and these rollers, and that's really what makes this thing run. So it's a really simple model, and all we have to do to tear this thing apart is remove this plate right here and unscrew these two screws here. And then just like that, everything's apart. So it's time to start cleaning everything up. I'm just going to use some rubbing alcohol and Q-tips, and I'll start with this part of the frame. I'll move on to the motor and this side. Then I'll do the wheels and that top bar because those are going to be the most intensive pieces of this. Now that all those parts have been cleaned up, we can start giving this thing just a tiny bit of fresh oil where it needs it, and then we can start putting this thing back together with some new bands. So this is kind of a tricky process, but to do this right, you just kind of set the wheel in here. Try and make sure your band is as straight as possible. I believe these are bands from like a bracelet making kit or something like that. I don't know where they came from, but these tend to work really well for these band drive models. Then you just kind of want to slide it on there like so, and then try and make sure the one on the other side goes in the exact same direction. And then now we can put this plate back on. And then I want to test this by hand because you can kind of see if these are turning either the same direction or in different directions. So, and as you can see here, they are both turning the exact same direction. If you have one of them going the other way, you're going to need to flip the band around, and it's really simple to do. You can just kind of take it off the post right there and flip it around on the Hustlers. It's nice and easy to do. I also got this cleaned up just enough to put back into the model. Now we can go get the shell and test this thing out. So the shell's been cleaned off and now the horns are drying back onto the model. And I did want to add on to something I mentioned earlier. I did not do justice when I was talking about the bands and where I got these from. I believe these are called Rainbow Loom bands or something like that. And I bought a pack of like 500 of them for I think like $5 or $6 on Amazon. I think at this point 4 or 5 years ago to work on these band drive engines. They don't come up that often, so I still have a huge stockpile of these things, and I've used them for various other projects too. So they're kind of nice to have around, but they work really well on these band drive engines. The only thing is I found in some cases they like to wear out really quickly, especially when exposed to some moisture or oil, which I think is kind of where I messed up on this engine. So before we finish up this guy, while I let this shell finish drying, I want to make a quick repair to this one because as you can see on the front truck, it looks perfectly fine. There's good tension with the rubber band and the axle. And on this side, it looks like there's a little bit of liquid. I can't remember if it's oil or rubbing alcohol or what. And there's some other stuck on stuff on here. And as you can see, the wheel's just kind of slipping without the band moving. And this band is like completely dried out too. So like, I'll see if I can do this. Like, yeah, it just crumbled. So these don't like liquid very much. So before we finish up the other one, let's do a quick little repair on this thing. It doesn't need any cleaning or anything, and I can show you how this thing runs just right now. And before we work on it, why don't I show you how the yellow one runs currently? So as you can see, it does run really well. It takes a while for it to get up to speed because of that one worn out band, which is why we're going to replace it. So as you can see, all we need to do is get in here and replace one band and clean off that axle. This one is a little bit different on the inside. I'm not going to focus on that too much, but these things do differ a little bit. I've worked on this model in the past as well. So now I'll give this a really good cleanup. I don't think it's rubbing alcohol because I haven't worked on this engine in quite a long time. So I don't think rubbing alcohol would stay. It usually evaporates really quickly. So I'm just going to give every bit here a good cleanup just to get whatever oil or whatever was on here off. All right, and now it's time to put the new band back on here. Perfect, and this one is all done. Now it's time to throw the shell back onto the Rio Grande one. And we can go test both these really simple models out. And I'll start by testing our main focus, the Rio Grande Hustler. I'll give it some power. And this thing seems to run just fine. I think it might be a little bit noisier than the yellow Hustler, but it still runs really well. Let's try running it in reverse this time. And you know what? This one runs great, so let's test out the yellow one now. And this is the one that already worked. Let's just hope that me putting on a new band didn't change anything. So I'll give this thing some power once again. It runs perfectly fine in reverse. As you could probably tell, this one runs really quietly. At least I think you can tell. And I'll flip the direction, and I'll give this thing some power and run it a lap the other direction. And this one runs just fine with the new band. So, now that both these are fixed, I find these band drive engines really fun to work on. I've worked on probably 4 or 5 in the past, and they're always really simple and pretty straightforward. All you can really screw up is the direction of the bands, which I almost always do. I don't know how I do this, but whatever, it happens. But they both run really well, and these are all really simple models to work on. So, well, this was probably a fairly short video. We got 2 of them fixed, one that needed a full rebuild, and one that just needed a new band, because these bands can be a little bit problematic sometimes. So I think that was a pretty big success.